Hey everyone, welcome back. We're doing a deep dive today into Kenyan history.
Ooh, Kenya.
It's going to be a good one.
Yeah, it is.
So much more than safaris
Right.
and landscapes. You know.
Exactly.
We're going way back.
Okay.
Ancient trade,
Mm-hmm.
colonial struggles,
I like it.
a rebellion that
Yeah.
really shook things up.
All right.
So get ready for a journey
Okay.
through time because we uncover the story of Kenya.
Yeah. You know what makes this deep dive so fascinating? Is how all of these different threads kind of weave together to create modern Kenya.
That's it. And we have some great sources for this one.
Awesome.
Academic papers,
Okay.
documents, even firsthand accounts to give us a different perspective.
You know those firsthand accounts?
Yeah.
They're really like windows into the past.
They really are.
You know, it makes you feel like you're right there
Really.
experiencing these huge events.
Okay, let's get started.
Okay.
Picture the Kenyan coast. Hundreds of years ago, it was this really vibrant hub of the Indian Ocean trade network.
Wow. Okay, so we're talking bustling Swahili cities.
Yes.
A mix of Arabic and Bantu cultures.
Exactly.
And trade routes going all the way to the Middle East and even further.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, this really challenges that common perception of Africa.
Yeah, no.
Being isolated, you know?
Right.
Like it was a disconnected.
Yeah.
But the Swahili coast was this global crossroads,
Totally.
a melting pot of cultures and trade for centuries.
And they weren't just trading goods, they were producing too.
Oh, really?
Our sources tell us.
Yeah.
Like this History of Kenya PDF.
Okay.
They had this thriving local production scene,
Interesting.
bead workshops,
Oh, wow.
skilled craftspeople making things everyone wanted.
That's amazing.
Right. So in the global marketplace, they were really sought after.
Yeah, those bead workshops are a great example.
Totally.
And there's another source, Full Text T01, I think it is.
Yeah,
it really
right.
digs into this. It challenges the idea that it was all about imports.
Right.
You know, they weren't just bringing stuff in. They were making things and exporting too.
And that really changes how we see
It does.
the Swahili coast.
Yeah.
They were influencing global trends, not just following them.
I love it.
But then things changed.
Yeah,
The British arrived,
of course.
late 19th century,
Yep.
and everything changed.
It always does.
Right.
Yeah.
And this History of Kenya source tells us
Mm-hmm.
they didn't want to just trade.
Okay.
They wanted land
Oh,
for farming
okay.
and profit,
Yeah.
which led to a clash.
Oh, no.
Yeah, a clash of interests
Uh-huh.
with some bad consequences.
And that's when things start to get tense.
Yes, and we see this
Where?
in some of our other
Sure.
sources,
Okay.
like Lonsdale too.
Yeah.
That PDS highlights
Okay.
the growing friction
Uh-huh.
between those European settlers
Yeah.
and the native Kenyan communities.
Especially when it came to,
Land,
yeah.
ownership,
Uh-huh.
and access to resources.
Which is interesting because that same source, it shows how both the settler and peasant economies were doing well.
Right.
But those settlers, they wanted cheap labor.
Right.
But the African farmers,
Yeah.
they were already so successful. They were producing most of the colony's maize.
It's like this economic tug of war.
Yeah.
Right.
Totally.
And eventually it had to explode.
Oh, yeah, and it did.
It
The
did.
Mao Rebellion.
Exactly.
Basically, primarily a Kikuyu movement.
Right, as History of Kenya
Yeah.
and Mao.
Okay, correct.
Those PDFs tell us.
Okay.
And unlike other movements
Yeah.
that targeted,
What, like infrastructure?
or government buildings,
Okay.
the Mao's target was the settlers themselves.
Oh, wow. They saw the settlers as the problem.
Yes, as like the embodiment of their dispossession.
Wow.
Right.
Yeah.
So to understand the Mao, you have to understand their oathing ceremonies.
Oh, yeah. Those were intense.
Right. We have a few sources on this.
Okay.
366-95659,
Okay.
Koya 60T2B1,
Uh-huh.
and this one S.M.T.
Okay.
Shamsul Alam,
Cut it.
Rethinking the Mao.
Okay.
That one.
They all talk about these ceremonies.
Yeah, and they weren't just like
Yeah.
casual pledges or handshakes.
Right.
They were deeply rooted in Kikuyu culture,
They were.
invoking spirits,
Oh, wow.
powerful rituals, this unbreakable bond.
They tapped into a power the British just didn't get.
Imagine being a British official
Oh my gosh.
trying to decipher these ceremonies.
No.
It would have been baffling.
Yeah.
Seeing them as savage,
Right.
demonic,
Because they had no way to understand it.
no framework.
Totally.
And this really shaped the British response,
Oh, of course.
which was brutal.
It was.
We have a source on this.
Okay.
ADA 469623
Right.
details their tactics. Military force,
Mhm.
detention camps,
Right.
everything.
They even used former Mao fighters.
Yeah, against their own people.
That's messed up.
It is.
Forcing them to betray their oaths.
I know, it's chilling
Yeah.
when you think about what those men went through
Totally. It shows how far they were willing to go.
to crush the rebellion.
Yeah.
Now, General China's account,
Okay.
in that s.m.shamsul source,
Yeah.
it really highlights the constant fear
Okay.
of guerrilla warfare.
Yeah.
He talks about how the British tried to win hearts and minds by building schools
Oh, wow.
and clinics in the villages, hoping to show
Yeah.
that life under their rule wasn't so bad.
I see.
But of course,
Yeah.
the Mao saw this as a threat.
Right. They would try to stop them,
Yeah.
even violently sometimes.
It was complex, both sides using different tactics
Yeah.
to get what they wanted.
And at the center of it all
Yeah.
was Dedan Kimathi.
Yes. The leader of the rebellion.
He was a visionary, dreaming of a post-colonial Kenya
Okay.
that was way more radical than what even some Kenyan nationalists wanted.
So not just independence, but like a total reshaping of society.
Exactly.
Wow.
With that same source,
Yeah.
it shows how Kimathi is a controversial figure.
Oh, how so?
Some portray him as a hero, others as ruthless.
It's like history can be seen
I can.
in so many ways.
Yeah.
There's not always one truth.
Right. It depends on who's telling the story.
Speaking of different perspectives,
Yeah.
how did the Mao rebellion affect Kenya's path to independence from the British point of view?
Well, JMS_Vietnam3C.pdf gives us a look into what the British Foreign Office was thinking at the time.
Okay.
They were really worried about the Mau Mau.
Makes sense.
They saw them as a potential trigger for unrest across the whole region.
Oh, wow. So like a domino effect.
Exactly. But what really scared them
Look.
was the Cold War.
Ah, the Cold War, of course.
Yeah, they thought the Soviet Union might try to get a foothold in Africa.
Right. Every global event back then was seen through that lens.
It was.
But how did the British go from panicking to actually granting Kenya independence?
Right. Good question.
What
changed?
Well, along with those Cold War fears,
Yeah.
there was this growing global movement,
Absolutely.
decolonization.
Okay, yeah.
The world was changing,
It was.
and the old colonial system was falling apart.
So they were fighting a losing battle,
They were,
both in Kenya and globally.
on every front.
So those internal pressures from the Mau Mau and those external pressures from the world forced them to change course.
They did, and finally in 1963, Kenya got its independence.
Oh, what a moment.
It was, and Jomo Kenyatta became the first president.
Kenyatta, yeah, okay. I've heard that name, but refresh my memory. What's the deal with them?
Well, S.M. Shamsul Alam, Rethinking the Mau Mau, that source goes into the different views on Kenyatta's link to the Mau Mau.
Oh, interesting.
Some say he was a key figure working in secret to guide the movement.
Others think he was more of a moderate nationalist who stayed away from the violence.
So a bit of a mystery.
It is a historical debate that's still going on today.
So even the path to independence was complicated,
Very much so.
full of internal conflicts, different visions, and lots of politics.
Absolutely.
But what's amazing is that despite the violence of the Mau Mau rebellion, Kenya's transition to independence was actually pretty stable.
Yeah, you're right. It was much smoother than in other parts of Africa.
ADA 469623, that source mentions that.
Yeah, they managed to avoid the chaos that a lot of other countries went through.
That's a really important point, and it shows how strong Kenyan society is.
It does, but we can't forget that it wasn't all peaceful.
Right. There were still problems.
There were Mauma.pdf brings up a big one, land redistribution.
Oh, right, because the colonial government took land from the Kikuyu people.
Yeah, and gave it to white settlers.
So when independence came, that land wasn't immediately returned.
Nope, and that caused a lot of anger and frustration.
So even though the British left the effects of colonialism, like, those land inequalities were still a huge problem.
It wasn't as simple as just getting a new flag and calling it a day.
No, it wasn't.
Some people took things into their own hands. They
Yeah.
became squatters on land that they felt belonged to them.
Wow, so that created new challenges for the new Kenyan government.
It did. They were trying to balance demands for justice with the need for stability.
A delicate balancing act.
It was.
So how is the Mau Mau rebellion remembered in Kenya today?
Oh, that's a tough one.
Is it seen as a heroic fight or a dark period?
Well, it's complex.
Okay.
In some ways, the rebellion has been romanticized.
How so?
The fighters are seen as heroes who fought for freedom.
Right.
But there's also more awareness now of the brutality and the internal divisions within the movement.
This is a complicated legacy.
It is.
Yeah.
And S.M. Shamsul Alam, Rethinking the Mau Mau, shows how the story of the Mau Mau has changed over time.
Interesting.
It often reflects how the political and social context changes.
So it's an event that still matters in Kenya today.
Very much so. It's not just history. It's something people are still trying to understand.
It's not just a Kenyan story either.
You're right.
It's become a symbol of anti-colonial resistance around the world.
It has, but its complexities are often forgotten.
Before we move on to post-colonial Kenya, can you sum up some of the key things we've learned about the Mau Mau?
Sure. One key takeaway is that the Mau Mau weren't just a bunch of angry rebels.
Okay.
They had a vision, a desire for a fairer society.
Right.
It went beyond just kicking out the British.
Got it. What else?
Their use of oathing ceremonies shows how powerful culture and tradition can be in mobilizing people and shaping resistance.
Makes sense. Okay. And the last thing.
The brutality of the conflict on both sides is a stark reminder of the cost of colonialism.
Wow.
And the lasting impact of violence on a nation.
Heavy stuff.
It is.
Good. Time for some more coffee, and then we'll explore what happened after the British left.
That's good.
Because, as we know, getting independence is just the first step.
It's just the beginning.
In Kenya's case, they had to deal with the legacy of colonialism.
Yeah.
The land inequality. And the challenge of creating a unified nation.
Out of so many different communities.
A huge task. So where do we even start?
Well, MauMau.pdfef gives us some interesting insights into that immediate post-independence period.
Okay.
There was a big focus on community development.
In what way?
Especially in agriculture.
Right, because land was at the heart of the Mau Mau Rebellion.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the new government had to address it.
So how did they do that?
Well, they bought large areas of land from white settlers.
Okay.
Some of the money came from the British government.
Interesting.
And then they redistributed that land to African farmers. Settlement schemes, mostly.
So basically land reform.
You could call it that the goal was to create a fairer agricultural landscape.
And to increase productivity.
Exactly.
Sounds promising. But were there any downsides to this approach?
It was a big change. You know, going from a system dominated by settlers to one focused on smallholder farmers.
Yeah.
It was complicated.
And some would argue that focusing on those cash crops,
oh, yeah, like coffee, tea.
the things that European markets wanted, led to a move away from traditional farming.
So even though Kenya was independent politically, economically, they were still kind of dependent.
Right. They were still tied to those former colonial powers.
It's interesting.
It is.
And MauMau.pdf also points out this cultural shift.
Yeah.
This new landscape with its European-style methods and cash crops.
Yeah.
It changed those traditional practices.
And those community structures.
Like decolonization isn't just about politics.
No, it's not.
It's about reshaping the whole society.
The economics, the culture.
Yeah.
It can be messy.
And controversial.
Absolutely. And that brings us back to the Mau Mau.
Okay.
How should we remember this movement? With all its violence and its hope for justice.
Yeah. S.M. Shamsul Alam, Rethinking the Mau Mau, really digs into this.
Okay.
It explores how different stories have come out over time.
So there's not one agreed upon version of the Mau Mau story.
Nope. Different people see it in different ways.
Makes sense.
Some view it as this heroic fight for freedom.
Okay.
They focus on the courage and the sacrifice.
Yeah.
Others focus on the brutality and those internal divisions.
Right.
They argue it's more complicated than just heroism.
It reminds me of those different accounts of Dedan Kimathi.
Yeah.
Was he a hero or a villain?
Right. It depends on who you ask.
Exactly. And that's what makes history so challenging and so important.
It is.
We're always dealing with these different viewpoints.
We are.
Trying to put together a picture of the past.
From all these different pieces
Right.
that don't always fit together neatly.
It's like a puzzle.
It is.
With missing pieces.
Yeah.
Bringing it back to that question we started with. Given the violence of the Mau Mau Rebellion, can we say it was necessary for independence?
Ooh, that's a tough one.
It is.
Historians, politicians, everyday Kenyans, they've been debating this for decades.
Yeah.
There's no easy answer.
Yeah.
Some say violence is never okay.
No matter what.
Right. Others believe that under colonial rule, armed struggle was the only way.
The only way to be free.
It's a moral dilemma.
Yeah, with no simple solution.
And it forces us to face the messy realities of history.
Right.
There aren't always clear heroes and villains
to the people
making hard choices.
in really tough situations. You know what's interesting?
What?
This whole conversation about Kenya,
Yeah.
especially the Mau Mau, it feels so relevant today.
It does.
When we think about colonialism,
yeah,
it's resistant.
And social justice movements all over the world.
It's like we're looking in a mirror.
I know, by looking at the past,
Yeah.
we can understand the present better.
And hopefully create a better future.
That's the goal.
It's like history isn't just these old facts and dates.
No, it's not.
It's a living story.
It is.
That shapes how we see ourselves in the world.
And as we saw with the Mau Mau,
Yep.
that story can be told in so many ways.
So many different perspectives.
And each one helps us understand the past a little bit better.
We've covered a lot today.
We have.
From ancient trade routes to rebellion to nation building.
It's been a journey.
But before we wrap up this deep dive into Kenyan history,
Yeah.
there's one thing we haven't really talked about.
What's that?
The role of women.
Oh, yeah, in the Mau Mau.
Yeah.
That's a great point.
They played such a vital role,
They did.
but it's often overlooked.
It is. They were involved in everything.
Like what?
From those oathing ceremonies
Wow.
to supplying food and weapons to the fighters.
So they weren't just supporters?
No, they were active participants.
That's fascinating. I had no idea.
Yeah, their stories are so important.
They are.
Both during and after the rebellion,
Yeah.
they give us a unique perspective. Bon pasa.
On the gender dynamics of colonialism
Okay.
and the challenges women faced in post-colonial Kenya.
You know what? I
That's
think
right.
we need a whole other deep dive just on that.
I agree. It's a story that deserves to be told.
All right, we'll put that on the list for a future episode.
Sounds good.
But for now,
yeah.
let's go back to those amazing sources we've been looking at today.
Okay.
What really stood out to you?
Oh, man. So many things.
I know.
But one thing that really hit me was how much colonialism changed Kenyan society.
Yeah.
And I'm not just talking about politics,
Right.
but also socially and economically.
It's all connected.
It is. And Lonsdale2.pdf,
Yeah.
that source really brought that home.
It did.
It's easy to just focus on the political side,
Right.
but the impact went so much deeper.
It affected everything.
It did land ownership, labor relations, even everyday life.
It's crazy when you think about it.
It is.
A whole new system forced on a culture that had existed for centuries. No wonder there was so much tension leading up to the mountain. It was a powder keg.
And speaking of the Mau Mau,
Yeah.
those insights into Dedan Kimathi's vision
Oh, yeah.
for post-colonial Kenya.
Shamsul Alam, Rethinking the Mau Mau.
Yeah, that one.
It really changed how I saw him.
Ollie.
I had this picture of him as this fierce revolutionary.
Okay.
But the source showed me so much more.
Like what?
His ideas about social justice and equality,
Yeah.
they were way ahead of their time.
Wow.
Even more radical than some other Kenyans who wanted independence.
So he wasn't just fighting to kick out the British.
No, he wanted to change the whole system.
And that's why his legacy is so fascinating.
It is, and so debated.
Yeah.
He represents those contradictions of the Mau Mau.
The violence and the idealism.
Yeah, the fight for freedom and those internal struggles.
It makes you wonder what Kenya would be like
I know.
if his vision had become reality.
But one of the biggest things I took away from this deep dive
Yeah.
is the power of culture,
Oh, yeah.
how it shaped both the resistance and how the British reacted.
Like those oathing ceremonies.
Exactly. They were so important to the Mau Mau.
Yeah.
But the British had no clue what they were about.
It shows how important it is to understand the culture.
Of any conflict.
Yeah, of any social movement.
The British tried to impose their own ideas,
Their own rules.
their own definition of civilized.
And it totally backfired.
It did. They underestimated the power of those traditions.
And maomao.pdf, it really showed me how crucial community development was,
It was.
especially those agricultural reforms.
Those initiatives were so important.
They were.
They addressed the land inequality that led to the rebellion,
Right.
and they helped rebuild trust.
And create a sense of shared purpose.
Exactly.
But as we talked about, even those efforts had their challenges.
They did.
It's a good reminder that progress isn't always straightforward.
No, it's not.
Every step forward seems to bring new problems.
New dilemmas.
Decolonization isn't just a moment.
It's an ongoing process
Yeah.
of change and adaptation.
And that's why looking at Kenyan history feels so relevant today.
It does.
The legacies of colonialism.
Yeah.
The fight for social justice.
The struggle to build societies that include everyone.
These are issues we're all dealing with.
All over the world.
It's like we're all connected.
We are by studying the past. Yeah. We understand the present better.
And hopefully we can make the future better.
I hope so.
History isn't just about the past.
No,
it's about understanding what shapes our world.
And using that knowledge to make a difference.
I think we've given our listeners a lot to think about.
I think so too.
Any final thoughts?
Just this Kenya's story, like every nation's story is a mix of good and bad.
And triumphs and tragedies.
Of individual stories and those bigger historical forces.
It's a story that's still being written.
It is. And the choices we make today will determine what happens next.
Well said. A huge thank you to you.
And to you.
And to our listeners for joining us on this deep dive into Kenyan history.
It's been a pleasure.
We'll be back soon with another fascinating exploration.
Can't wait.
But until then, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep diving deep